Hello and welcome to Understanding and Interpreting the 1950 Census. I am Louise Cooke, and I do the 11s with Lisa show over at Genealogy Gems YouTube channel. And that's a weekly live show. I hope you'll join me there if you enjoy this presentation, because we have so much fun digging into the world of genealogy and helping you find your family history. That's a free show that you can watch over at YouTube and also find at my website with lots and lots of notes and handouts. There's also the Genealogy Gems podcast. That's free. If you like the audio show, you can take me with you on your phone. And I write the Lisa's Picks column for Family Tree Magazine. And as well, I publish the Family Tree Magazine podcast. So there's another little bit of genealogy for your ears. In this session, we are going to talk about the party that is starting April 1st of 2022, and that is the release of the 1950 US Federal Census. And I think it's just so important with any genealogical record that we understand and interpret it correctly. So in this session, what we're going to do is talk about the story behind this record set. And that means the who, the what, where, when, how, right? I talked about this quite a bit on my show. It was episode 37. You can still check that out for free at my website and at the YouTube channel. Kind of the provenance of records, the story behind them. You know, if we understand who's creating them, why they're doing it, what they're doing, how it got done, we're going to have such better success at understanding what we're seeing and really deciding how valid is this, how accurate is this, do I trust this, do I want to maybe get some more evidence for this? That's what we're trying to strive for. So let's jump right into understanding more about it, the who, what, where, when, how. And let's talk about where. So the geography of the 1950 census is important to understand. So you kind of know, maybe you have some relatives you didn't think would fall in it, and they will, or they won't. We'll see. Look at the extent that they went to. So they're enumerating in Alaska. Now, in 1950, Alaska's not a state, right? But it is one of the territories, and they went to great lengths to head up there and take the census. So let's look at a map generated from 1950. This came out in 1950. It's population per square mile by counties in the continental United States. And it does cover the continental United States. It's really interesting to see all the really non-populated areas at that time. There was about 150 million people across the country at that point. But in addition to the continental United States, they also, in the census, covered the territories of Alaska and Hawaii, American Samoa, the Canal Zone, Guam, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and some of the smaller island territories. So a little broader than we might have thought. Now let's talk about the who, the census enumerators that were involved in this project. Wow, they had a big job, bigger than ever. And in fact, I want to share with you a little bit of the history about this job because it really helps you appreciate what they put into it. Did you know that up until about 1870, the job of the census taker actually fell to the US Marshals? And they didn't get a lot of training. In fact, they really didn't have hardly any instructions at all. And it really wasn't until at least 1830 that they even got a printed schedule to work with. So if you've ever felt frustrated looking at past censuses and thinking, where are my people? And people are just missing and this isn't right. Well, you know, you have to give these guys a little bit of a pass because they only had so much to work with. But the good news is in 1950, they really took this into account and really focused on accuracy and completeness. Now, in 1879, the Act of Congress that was passed shifted the job to people specifically hired as enumerators. So it wasn't just a default as being a U.S. Marshal. People got hired to do this, and it was just in time for the 1880 census. You see here Frank Wilkerson. He was hired for the 1880 census, and he had a couple opinions about his neighbors and their occupations. But I digress. Okay, so what does that tell us? Well, it tells us they've come a long way. By the time they get to 1950, They are really striving for more completeness. In fact, after the 1940 census, they started doing this card punch process that they had. After the 1950 census, they had the UNIVAC machine that came in. So it wasn't just about going out and taking a census, but it's really about tabulating the data. Can you do that accurately and efficiently and quickly? Can you do it without dropping cards or losing information? And they were really just on the beginnings of the technology that we're seeing today. So it takes a lot of enumerators to count 150 million people. And one of the things they were trying to do to make sure it was complete and accurate was to train them more than they ever had before. And so this is the training program that they put into place in 1950. And they started with like 26 of these chief instructors, the people who kind of put the game plan together. And then they trained a few hundred instructors who went out and then had 8,300 crew leaders across the country, eventually training 140,000 enumerators. Pretty incredible amount. So I hope this gives you confidence and some ideas about feeling good about the information you're going to be seeing, because they really did try to put in some new processes in place. A first in 1950 was that the post-enumeration survey was put into place. So they went in after the fact and they rechecked what they were doing. The Census Bureau recanvassed a sample of about 3,500 small areas, and they compared them to the original census listings to identify households that may have been omitted in the original enumeration. And in fact, a sample of about 22,000 households was re-interviewed. So again, I hope that gives you some more confidence about the data that you're seeing. So how did census enumerators know where to be counting? How did they make sure that they just weren't crossing paths? Well, that's where the enumeration district comes into play. And these are called EDs often. You'll hear ED, you'll see ED at the top of the census form. That's the geographic area that they're supposed to cover. And the idea here was to make an area that a single person could cover within the allotted amount of a couple of weeks of the taking of the census. And they also wanted to make sure they weren't crossing paths with other people, or worse yet, completely nobody hit one spot, right? That it just got missed. So a ton of planning with these really detailed ED maps to make sure that it was a doable project and that everybody got covered. And they had to be covering this area in about 2 to 4 weeks' time. Of course, it started about April 1st of 1950. So this is what an ED map looks like, and they were drawn on really detailed maps. These maps come from a variety of places, so depending on where you're looking, you may see one that came originally from the county, one that was done for electrical purpose. And there's all kinds of reasons. People who were generating maps, and they would go and get a copy and use that as their base. They might have even taken a map from the 1940 census. So these are available. They're free. There's 8,000 of them available over the National Archives, and they give you a really unique glimpse of your ancestors' homes. So if you want to learn more about doing that, check out episode 79 of my show over at YouTube and on my website. I would say go to my website because there is full-length kind of typed up show notes for you, a handout showing you step-by-step how to find them, how to download them, all that good stuff. And there's also census enumerator instructions. That's how they knew how to count and what they were doing. These are key to you understanding the data that you're finding in the census as you're working with it. So it really helps you interpret and understand what you're seeing. So I would really recommend that you download this. It's available from the Census Bureau. It's about a 24-page PDF document, really specific instructions for the enumerators. And it's just so important to understand the why. Why is this on there? Why is something missing? Why did they say it that way? It will really help you interpret, and also how much weight to give each piece of information. Some things you might realize they weren't even so sure that it was how accurate it would be, and so you might want another piece of evidence to kind of back that up. So again, that is there's a link in your handout where you can go and download that from the Census Bureau. And that's one of the best ways to understand this 1950 census. So here's another great example, I think, of why you would want to get those instructions. In 1940, when you look at the records that are currently available, you might have noticed this. They put an X in a kind of a circle, and it was only next to some people's names. But if you go and check out the 1940 census enumerator instructions, you'll see that it says enter an X after the name of the person furnishing the information. So this tells you a lot. You might notice this and go, I'm not sure, why they were doing that. But now you know. So if Tula is giving information about somebody else and she's not even related to them, you might want to take that with more of a grain of salt than you would as if a wife giving information for a husband, or a husband giving information about himself. So knowing who's giving the information is going a long way to understanding how really accurate it is. So also, there was an infant card done for children born between January and March of 1950. There were actually 860,000 births recorded just in that time frame, and it was infant card P3. You might have heard about these, but unfortunately, these are no longer available. Really, the purpose of this was to generate some statistical reports about the growing population and the birth of babies. And they wanted to also make sure that they were capturing these children on the census, because in past censuses they found many times infants weren't even mentioned in the household, and so they didn't get recorded. So if you're interested in something like that, there is a statistical report that was created based on these infant cards that's available, and you can download that at the Census Bureau. But if you hear about these or you see these mentioned in the instructions, just know that the cards themselves, unfortunately, are not available. And that study that I mentioned was completed in 1953, and it's available online. Now, one of the big challenges of counting people is that people keep moving around. And this was more the case after World War II than ever before. And they had more automobiles. They had cash in their pocket. They were building highways. People were on the move. And they really enjoyed seeing the wonderful landscape of the country. So the problem with that is that people can get missed altogether, or they could be counted twice if they show up in different places at different times. So one of the things they did, and I think this is really interesting to know about this particular census, they decided to kind of get them all on one day in one spot. It was called T-night canvasses, and the T stood for transient. So this is anybody who's at a campground, at the YMCA, who's on vacation, who's homeless. I mean, there could be many reasons why a person would not be in a regular residence. And so on April 11th, I think that was a Tuesday night, they held this, and they went to all the campgrounds and the motor courts and all those places, and they counted everybody. And then they went back, and the next morning did it as well. On the 13th, they went to like homeless shelters and those kinds of places. So what it really resulted in was a more accurate count of people who didn't have a fixed address. So from 5 to 11 p.m. on Tuesday night, they did an intensive drive to cover in a single night the occupants of certain places usually devoted to transient people, hotels, YMCAs, tourist courts. And remember the motor courts? You could drive right up to a little cabin, and you'd have a shared shower. Those were really popular along the highways and byways. In 1940, there were over 100,000 YMCA rooms. It was considered a safe place that you could spend the night. And so that's where they went. Then they came back the next morning in case somebody came in after 11 p.m. and made sure they counted everybody. On the 13th, they went to the missions and the flop houses. And they would talk to folks and just make sure they caught everybody. In fact, they put a letter out to the hotel association to let them know this is what they were going to do. And they were going to come in with this ICR form. Now, I don't know if this individual census report form is going to actually be available. I think the information just got transferred into the final census. But this was actually completed by the person themselves, because if you're at the YMCA and you're staying in a hallway, there's not very much privacy. So the census taker would hand them the form, and then they could fill it out. So they also, if they really couldn't find somebody, they would even work off the hotel register. And you might see REG written next to somebody's name, and that would be that their information actually came off of the register itself. So they really made quite an effort, and if they couldn't find the person, but they did find them in the register or something else, they filled out the ICR for them. So kind of interesting to see the efforts behind how they did all of this. And did you know that in 1950, it was the last time that the census was taken exclusively in person? So in 1960, the Census Bureau started mailing out questionnaires. They still had people who went in person, but the population was growing so fast that it became a combination of personal visits from census enumerators and also mailing out the forms. So this is really the last time it's a one-on-one kind of situation for data collection. So the story behind the 1950 census, it's going to be released April 1st of 2022. Of course, it was originally started on April 1st of 1950. And we talked about the where of the 1950 census and the geography of it. And it really did go beyond just the continental United States at that time. We talked also about the who, the census takers themselves. And I really encourage you to get the enumerator instructions, because that's huge to understand how and why they did what they did and the data that you're seeing on the form. The how was, we talked a little bit about the enumeration history and the process and the fact that more than ever, they finally got enough training and resources to do the best job possible. And what about the what? Well, I do have some related sessions for you. If you want to know more about the census itself, the what it was, what it looks like, what the forms are going to look like, I have 2 sessions here at Roots Tech. One is what you can find in the 1950 census. And in fact, in that session, we also talk about what you can't find, which I think is important to know too, if you're looking for something that's not there. And the other session is 5 tangible things you can do right now to use the 1950 census when it comes out. Now, if you're watching this after April 1st of 2022, this session is still really, really going to be helpful to you, because the best kind of research happens when you do a little bit of prep work, have a good research question, kind of have your ducks in a row. So when you tackle those records, you know what you're going after and you have the most success possible. And that's my goal. Is I just hope you have a wonderful time exploring the 1950 census. And I hope you had a wonderful time here. I hope you'll stay in touch with me. You can do that at lisalouisecooke.com, or also genealogygems.com. Takes you to the same spot. And there you can sign up for my free email newsletter. It comes out once a week. It'll tell you about free shows, both the audio and the video shows that I'm doing. And we can stay in touch together all year long. Plus, you get a free little download. It's all my best tips and tricks for genealogy research success. So I hope that you'll check that out. Thank you so much for joining me for Understanding and Interpreting the 1950 U.S. Census. Bye.